Hello, this is Philip Steiger again at thebest3d.com with Project Dog Waffle, and this is PD Howler, the version running under version 9.6 running under Steam. And as usual, you can see here which version it is, 9.6. There's sort of a major revision or a generation build number here, 4 point something, and then you see the 9.6 at the end. Keep It Cute is the code name for this particular project. And we are continuing to keep it cute. I wanted to cover in this one here kind of an introductory tutorial on creating a new document from the File and New menu, and in fact making it square shaped. Let's make it 1024. Now we currently have the constraint on the aspect ratio here, so I'm going to uncheck that and put 1024 here as well. And the reason I'm going for 1024 is that I'm going to focus in this tutorial on building assets such as textures or images that will typically contain something like foliage images, and bushes and trees, grass perhaps also, and some of that simply against a transparent background, right? So it's not necessarily the full image. It's more a tuft of grass or a bush or 2 or 3 bushes together. And I want to explore some of the foliage brushes that Project Dog Waffle has. So let's dive right in. We have, by default, initially when you started, you have the brush tool selected. And again, this layout here is highly customizable. You might even click here to get rid of that sidebar. We call that the sidebar. That one might be on the left side, it might be on the right side. You see that's under the window layout options here. You can see sidebar on the right or on the left. You can see the toolbar itself here, which is the left side here. That one can be 2 columns. If you have a small screen, you may need to fit it into the screen by having it on 2 columns side by side, or a single column. You can even have it float to the toolbar. You can have this toolbar also on the right side or on the left side, independent of the sidebar. So lots of ways to customize it, plus a lot of interface styles. You have the duck egg and a couple of light blues, dark blues, charcoals, lots of different high contrast, light contrast, many different ways to make it look a bit more flat, maybe just a flat look on the toolbar. So you know, if you like this raised button look, that may help. Try that. And so experiment with customizing your interface a little bit when you're new to this. And then also another option to explore is settings. Under Window and Settings, you'll see here how you have general settings and then GUI specific, such as adding scroll bars, using the middle button for panning. If you have a 3-button mouse, the middle button for panning, and who doesn't have a 3-button mouse these days, right? Spline based input, that's sort of a interpolation or a spline interpolation. It's moving of your dabbles of your drawing. So if you go very quickly, instead of sort of seeing a jagged line, you might see a little bit more of a smoothed line. Curve, a custom brush bounding, that's to show the bounding box of the custom brush, right? If you have a large image loaded in your brush or a custom brush, normally in the preview, the PRV will actually show you that brush. But instead, you can also say, okay, I want to just see the outline of that, the bounding box of that entire brush image, to get an idea of how big it is, but I don't need to necessarily see its image. Invert alpha highlight color, that's when you go to the selection menu and you enable the alpha overlay so that you have a pink or a purple coloring of any pixels that are not selected through alpha. And instead, you may want to actually have those that are selected appearing in pink. So you can invert that behavior. There is a smooth scaling, and that's when you zoom in, when you scale the image, when you zoom in, should the pixels show just as replicated bigger, but without transitional smoothing, or should they be smoothed? And you see that here. Use a bilinear interpolated smoothing when zooming. And then here is something for international users to play with. If you are, let's say, in Germany or France, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, in many countries where numeric values with decimal fractional parts are separated not by the period but by a comma, right? So for instance, you have 1.2, it would be 1 comma 2. And same, for instance, for the output to a wavefront OBJ file. The conversion may actually end up writing it as a comma rather than as a period. And here you may be able to fix that, at least for the user interface parts that have numeric values with floating point input. And we will see that actually under particles when we go to draw some of the particle brushes, there are lots of parameters there, and some of them are integer parameters, but some of them are floating point values, and you might see the floating point values actually as a floating comma value, right, depending on that setting. So that's that. That's probably something you can ignore if you're using the US American or just the English version of Windows. If you're using a non-English version of Windows, this might be an interesting parameter to play with if you're having difficulty with the numeric value input on text boxes. There's also, when saving a default value for the quality on your JPEG, if you find that these JPEGs are not detailed enough, because you know it's lossless. It's not lossless, it's lossy. The JPEG format is great, small files, but it's lossy. So you may want to keep it high, 80, 85, 90. I think 99 is the max, but sometimes 75 is just plenty enough. And then there's also a color you can have for the main background fill here, right? All right, so that's the GUI aspects. You can also reset everything here, killing the registry keys that Dogwaffle sets. So if Howler has lost a window, it went off screen, you change the screen resolution, you can no longer access it. You can try to gain them back simply by resetting it, or of course by resetting the screen resolution to what it used to be. Under General, there's also memory options. Make sure you click that and set it to the max. It's not really a high value. By today's standard, 256 megs is very welcome, and you should use that. There's also a path here that you should explore and remember. Where is actually the temp folder for Howler? Right, it's in the app data local area, right? Users, owner, app data, whatever it is in yours. You may want to bookmark that. I mean, you want to go open it and browse it and see what's in there. Maybe there's some past images that you thought you had lost, and you may be able to recover them from there. Maybe they're not in the format you hope. Maybe they're not in JPEG or TIFF. Maybe they're in Targa, but still they're there and you can recover them. So try that. This is really good for the number of undos, right? We don't have a fixed or a set level of undo. It's not like 10 levels of undo or 20 or 60 or 100. It's how much memory. So if you have a lot of memory allocated for the undo, then you can have more levels of undo. But of course that depends on how big the images are. Right? If you have really very large images, only a few undos will be possible. Even if you have the maximum amount of memory here, you may be able to perhaps have just 5 or 10 levels of undo. Still better than nothing, right? And so that's one thing to use. The other things is you may want to see whether your computer is a rather fast one. You can do some investigation of that on the threading and GPU. The number of threads usually should be known to you. Like if you have a dual core processor or a quad core, like an Intel i5 or i7 should show as 8. That's the number of logical cores. And we currently support up to 64. And yes, there are users with up to 64 cores, 32 cores, a high-end Mac Pro with, well, what's that, Xeon, maybe 16 cores. But we know of users who have very special, like server configurations with 2 Xeon cores. You could have 4 Xeon cores or Opteron chips from AMD at 16 cores each, right? 4 times 16, 64 cores total. So that's a very high-end, addictive high-end configuration, and I'm just very envious of those people who can afford and have one of those. But we support it. It's designed to go up to 64 cores. For some of the modules that are multi-threaded, it's going to be a screamer. We also do have some modules on the GPU, so by default it's enabled if the system detects that you have a decent GPU accessible, and of course you can disable it if you happen to know that there are some issues with it. You can also run some benchmarks with or without screen refresh, so these benchmarks will give you an idea of how much faster things can go when they go through the GPU than rather using your CPU. Alright, so enough said about configuration. We'll keep it the way it is here right now, and just see if we can do a little bit of dabbles here. We can click the brush to select a brush. We have a menu in that case on the additional context bar here for more brushes. You can also right-click the brush. And among these brushes, you'll see, of course, a lot of them that are what people will call natural media or simulating smearing and or airbrushing and that sort of things, spatter brushes. Some of these are really good to know that they exist because you may want to quickly create star fields or just something totally different, right? So there are some large brushes in oils also, large cover. Typically you might want to use that to quickly get the basic tonality of your picture. You're going to paint something maybe with white on the horizon and then go back to Los Angeles gray. No, not green. We don't have rainfall in California. Something like this in the bottom part of your scene, and then you start refining this and you have your nature painting happening here. But there are other brushes. You'll see bristle brushes here. These are just a couple of presets. You also see the media browser, and with that one you can pin down, might put them perhaps on a second screen or explore some of the predefined brushes, and you can create your own categories and add your own brushes with new presets. So there are some particle brushes here, there's some bristle brushes, and there's more to explore. So there are also foliage brushes. Now we don't have them here as a shortcut, but we'll explore that in a few seconds. So just a quick look at the particle brushes. What these do is essentially throw some particles, and the particles can go change color based on all sorts of parameters. They can, for instance, you see right now they're shooting downwards, so they stay dark, and when I turn down the other way, when I move down, they're shooting. Basically, this one is a preset that shoots in the opposite direction of my moving the mouse. Right. So if I go this way down, they actually climb up. Not very far, not very long, but they are being lit. When I go the other way, they appear to be dark because it's the intent for that to be shaded. So there are some parameters, obviously, that are different from one set to another. There are some really different, very, very strange cases also. There's some aloe looking, there's some baddie grass. I love the baddie grass. So that one does a combination of both shooting some helms of grass upwards, and those you see as light green, and then you see some dark ones also, and those are the ones shooting down, right? So if you paint from the top down, kind of sideways, you can easily create sort of a field of bad grass, right? That's what we call it, baddie grass, and you can go up and down a little bit. Now maybe you'd like to have it yank out of the wrist, a little bit of a tall tuft, right? And how can you control that? You actually have a bunch of parameters for all of these, and we'll explore some of those. So let's go right in. These are just the presets. Instead, you may want to actually explore the actual settings, and that's all the way on the other end here on the on the sidebar, on the toolbar. The context bar, we call it, because that one will change in context, right? If you choose the fill tool, you see it change here. In fact, some of them even have an additional context bar. That's the curve tool or the line tool. But most of the time there's just one context bar, and in the case of the brush, the context bar has some settings for brushes in general, and you can see there's all sorts of options here to play with. Some of them are shortcuts here in the context bar itself, like this one here, the size, this one, or the opacity. You'll see them here too, opacity. There's the steps, there's the steps. All right, so if you change it here, you'll see it change here as well. Random position, some of them are not shortcuts in the toolbar, but that's okay, you still can access them here. Well, there is another one here, and that's particles. So in this tutorial, and it's just getting started, we are going to focus on some of these particle brushes. We used to call them Optiposticks, optical octopus, I guess. It's because it's shooting in many different directions. Now that's only if it's enabled. So you need to first enable it, and there's 4 different categories to choose from. Perhaps the most exciting one for us game developers here is really the foliage one, and secondary maybe the particles. That one was the first one there. So let's start with that one. We enable it, and then we'll start shooting. And so that's where we have these particle brushes shooting in all sorts of different directions. The default one doesn't look like that, by the way. It looks a bit more like a waterfall. There are some presets down here. Click on load, and I don't know which one the default is, but let's just play a few. Let's say, so the baddie grass, you can see here. And if you draw a little bit faster, you're going to be really done quickly. But you say, well, I need this as an asset. I need this on transparent background. And you know, we don't have layers that can be fully opaque versus transparent background unless you play some games and gimmicks with the coloring of the erase color, you know, like magic magenta, magic pink, and then just don't use pink in your actual painting. So you could use that, but the idea here is to say, well, but what can we do without that? So one thing you can do is, instead of drawing the style as lines, because that's what it's doing right now, the particles are shooting as lines, you could click on this style and say, I need line plus alpha, right? So look what happens. At the end, when you let go of your cursor, it's actually rendered this into alpha as well, right? So let's go and erase everything. Well, that's only erasing the color, so you need to erase the alpha. That's the selection. Let's go to selection and clear alpha, or use Control D. Right, and now with line plus alpha, if you're doing a little tuft like this, boom, you have the entire alpha channel rendered as well. And so now you may want to see get a better ideas of what is selected and what is not selected, right? I mean, did I actually select the outside or the inside of this tuft? Hopefully the inside. So you can see under selection that you can also show the overlay on alpha. And that's where you know, you get that pink appearance for pixels that are not selected. And then when you zoom in, obviously there is a transition somewhere, because some of these are only partly selected. There is an anti-aliasing transition. But the whole thing is that because you see the colors here as is, that means these are fully selected. And then here outside, they are not selected. If you put that into alpha, if you put that into a PNG image with the alpha channel, that will make the outside transparent. Although it's still there, it still has a color. It's white, in fact, in this case. But it also has the flag on the alpha channel saying, hey, don't show me, I'm transparent. Every pixel out here is going to stay transparent. Now, that's really up to the application as to what it does with that information, right? I mean, you may look at it in Ifan View, it's not going to show any different. But you may look at it in Photoshop or in some other programs where it's going to stack up the layers, or you may slap that as a billboard image on a billboard polygon, on a rectangle inside your game, and then at that point the outside here will be transparent, the inside here will be opaque and show you the actual grass image. So how do we do that? Well, you need to simply pick this up as a custom brush. Now you can do that sometimes simply as you selected this brush, right? Whatever the selected part here is, use this as a brush. Let's do that. So now it actually cleared the alpha, it doesn't need it anymore, or so it thinks, but it has the brush image, it has the image inside your brush. You can go and store that, store and manage a copy of it. And there you go. Now you see this tuft all the way with a little bit border around it, because it went out to see how far does it need to go to find any pixels that are still partly visible and partly selected. Right? I mean, outside here there's probably still a few with very little selection, but still not fully transparent. So all of this is now in the custom brush. You can enable the preview of the brush, but right now you don't see it because we're still painting with these particles. You need to disable that. Now you can see it. Right, now you can see that this brush is there. It's actually not at full opacity, because the opacity here is at 180, and you need to bring that up to 255. Now you see it at full opacity. Now you also see a little bit of a white border towards the bottom, right, around the edges, that glowing effect. You don't see it when it's against white, but when you see it against a dark color, then you notice that, right? And so when you paint with this, that might be okay if you paint on something bright. You don't see it. But if you paint another one on top, then around here, you'll see that there is some white edges. And that's something you can also fix. Many times you simply go to Brush, Transparency, and work on that. I think it's here. Yeah, Transparency, Feather. Well, one thing you can do is you can shrink it, or no, it's here. Pre-multiply correction, right? Pre-multiply correction will tell the system, wait, we actually had white background here, right? Let's go get rid of that, right? And voila, magic happens. So now we don't have that glow effect anymore. Now that's not always going to work. It depends on how intense or how far it goes. But for this particular case, it worked. So lucky me. And that's really what you want to do as far as like building assets, is build assets that are really beautiful and that you can use without much concern about that glowing edge effect. So now you can basically paint that and get done even faster for large images with a fairly decent look. Now you don't use this brush anymore, you want to store this one, right? So let's go brush and store and manage this one. This one here you might still want to keep, occasionally accidentally select this one, you get this white glow, and say, oh no, this one is better, yep, no white glow here. So you might minimize it, or even just delete it if you don't need it anymore. This one here you might minimize it if you want to now work with it, but you don't want it in your way. You want it to kind of be in a compact place. So another thing you can do with it though is you can, we call it, don't just store it, but store and manage it, because you may want to change the size, you may want to change the orientation of that image. You may want to even change the hue saturation value here, so give it a slightly different tint, right? A bit more of a reddish, maybe dry grass tufts. And then perhaps something a little bit more saturated or greenish or something like that. And there's also increase the saturation of that or decrease it, give it a bit more of a grayscale look, right? And then there's also the brightness of it all. So here's the saturation, here's the brightness, a bit more intense here, right? That's a nice one to use if you want to give a bit of different tonality inside your image, some dark shade, some trees nearby or buildings nearby casting shadows. Okay, use it a little bit darker, make it a little bit darker, and then so it will be really in the shade or something like that. And then suddenly you have some sun rays nearby, and you have some parts that are lighter. And so you can play with these, and that brush is great as long as it's inside of Howler. One thing you may be tempted to do is store it as a media. Just do that. Create a category here, something like my brushes, my ridiculous brushes, my amazing brushes, and put them together and then save them, give them a name, and you can easily recover them. So these are media content, media brushes, or these types of brushes essentially contain a bunch of parameters, all the settings that you have here. Typically these will be saved with it, and then also what image, and that's the image you see right there, or this one here. Now, sometimes you really don't want to keep it just there. You want to take it out of PD Howler and you want to take it into your game or into your 3D program. And I don't care if it's Blender or Carrara or whatever it is, Lightwave 3D. This is a great image to use as an asset, and so we call this perhaps something that will go on a billboard polygon, right? A billboard polygon is basically like a poster, but parts of it are transparent, so you will actually not see those parts. You will see whatever else is in the scene behind it, and so you can carry that on a rectangular polygon, for instance, on a billboard polygon, and put that type of foliage right into the scene of your 3D environment. So the way to do that is from the brush, simply go and save it, right? You have a save option in the brush, not just in the file area, but right in the brush, because this is a brush-centric program. It focuses on what you can do with the brush rather than other ways. So with the brush, with the image in that brush, you can go and save it, and you'll have some options for, PNG, and a couple of other formats, Targa, BMP, JPEG, PNG, and so on. Not layers, just single images. That's all we need, and that will be all we have. So now let's explore some other types of brushes you can actually create with that, right? Just to get an idea of what you should probably want to do with that. Enable these particles again, and let's try some other settings. Right? So we have, fancy Fandiago. Okay. Let's do something like this. Let's make sure we go at 100% full size so we don't get slowed down by additional scaling. Let's see, what else do we have? Joshua trees. Let's see, what else? Genie effects. Spiky. And of course, all of these are also controllable with these parameters. You have a gradient here. Click that if you need to change or choose a different gradient. In fact, you can just choose among here the 8 preloaded sections. A gradient collection is 8 gradients, and so one of those you can select easily, and it's using that. Say, no, let's use this one. There you go. So again, if you want that with transparency, you need to enable the alpha mode. Now, these ones are not lines. Before we had lines, right? And this one are now shrinking lines. So there's another group here. Shrinking lines with an initial size, and some of them pretty big. Something like that, and you may say, okay, I need the alpha channel there too. Let's go shrinking lines plus, or plus alpha, right? In an earlier version it was showing only plus, but you see now that it also renders into the alpha channel. So let's go clear the alpha and do something like a little dabble like this, boom, and done. Now you can see that it has the alpha channel on that. You may need a refresh, so just zoom in or something like that. And then so you can go pick that up again. Now again, you can do that either from brush, use selected as brush, or another technique is to use this tool here, right? This is the custom brush selector. The custom brush selector tool allows you to go and pick a portion of this image. Just give it enough margin, but you don't have to pick the whole image. That's the point. And you can say, let's pick this up. So now you have picked that up. Again, with transparent background, let's go to brush, store, and manage. And you now have a second brush. You got this one, and you get this one. Lucky you got two brushes. All right, so with that, and still, if the particles is enabled here, then it won't show the preview, but the moment you disable the particle brushes, it shows you whatever is next in line, and that's the custom brush that you see here. And so you can paint with that through the current alpha channel here, right? So if you clear the alpha channel, if you clear the selection, again, you can paint everywhere. Let's see one or two more here. Let's go enable the particles again and see what other presets we have. Let's see, towards the bottom, there's one I use a lot here, the winter branches, right? And you want to do a winter scene, and you want to have some bushes like these, and then you have the grass, right? So then you go back to maybe this one, and oops, disable the, there you go, and put that in front. So the winter branches are pretty neat. I'm going to go to that, enable the winter branches, and paint with that. And now let's see what else we should do, really, and that's to explore these parameters. It may be okay if we find a perfect preset, but most of the time you really need to further customize that. And you look at this and say it looks neat, but it looks too regular, too predictable, right? It doesn't have enough randomness to it or noise. Mother Nature is not that perfect. Actually, no, she is, and that is what makes it perfect. What makes it perfect is that it is messy. So what we want to do is add some mess here, add some randomness, randomize values by some amount. Here, if we have 0, it's very predictable. This is what I call solid German engineering. Right. Then the other thing is my French side. So let's go in, let's see, randomize values. Let's go 2. Now it looks a bit more messy. Let's focus on the good stuff, right? So randomize 5. There. All right, maybe that's the way that it should look. So again, we can go shrinking lines plus alpha, and voila, you have your selection mask here too. Control D to clear it and do something like that, and now you have an asset that you can use. Brush, you selected, bingo. You have now store that, brush, store image, store and manage. There's another one here, by the way, store as an image. This brush, the currently loaded brush, can also be stored as an image. And then you can bring this back, right? But I mean, this is just a brush, not this full image with this large background around it. If you wanted to store that, you can do that too. In fact, let me go undo until I'm back to the selection mask. So I can go to image and say store an image copy. So that one has the whole big white background around it, whereas this one had just a brush image, right? So there's a slight difference there. But you know, sometimes you work with that. You use all sorts of other options you have here. You can even make this image your current color picker. Simply click that, and it becomes the turkey baster here, and this becomes your color palette. So you can use this as a color picker. As you go around here, you'll see the primary color. If you drag your mouse, you see the primary color change. All right, so that's a color picker here. Uncheck that, so it becomes just a regular stored image. Back to our particles here. Let's go and keep it in there, and you see that we can keep drawing and Control D to clear. And so let's say now something else. There are other categories. There's particles. These are regular particles. Tons of parameters for you to explore, though, right? The lifespan. How long do these particles get, right? Splits. How many times do they split? Very little or a lot. Let's go split 22 times. And you see it's quite a different appearance on those particles. So these parameters, the size for thick brushes, thick branches, there's even a force field. You can have this existing image act as a force field to deform and disrupt the normal progression of the particles. So if you have, for instance, seaweed, if the seaweed, let's go and clear this here. If the seaweed normally goes like this, right, But now you enable the force field on this existing image, or undo this and use this as the force field. Now that force field is basically a displacement map coming from this image. And so if you give it a bit of power here, this will make the appearance very different. Now your seaweed is really more like mold, and it adheres, or it follows the shape of the image, any shape, whatever the shape is. Now if you, for instance, you go to render an image like dread plating, yeah, why not, let's do that. Okay, let's free the force field, close it, and start a new force field from this new image. Right, coming up. Did I click it? There it is. Okay, oh, I had to unclick it first. All right, so now if I use this without force, right, it's got nothing to do. The particles don't even see the image, don't see the force field, right? Whereas if I go with the force, now you see a very different behavior. Now it's starting to line up against the shape of these dread plating. And so you can have a drastically different appearance, even without the image seen. The image is gone right now, I erased it, but it still has the force field. And so you can see how it's got these rectangular main directions that it's taking. And so depending on how much of that force drag you apply here, this can be a rather very different image that you create. And again, you can still have that with shrinking lines and alpha, and combine this to even better, greater use. So here's something like this, and you can pick this up as a custom brush. Let's see, uncheck this. So now you see the alpha channel here, and I'm gonna go and pick this image, brush, you select it as brush. Now I have this in my image. I need to perhaps get rid of the white edges. Let's go, that's under pre-multiply correction, and say, yep, we had some white stuff around it in the background. Let's correct that. So now we have a really good image to use as an export for a asset. And so I think enough done on those optipustics. The default particles is what we spent most of our time with here. I'm going to clear the force field. I'm going to let you play with some others. There is fog, there is more. This one is the age decrement. Lots of stuff to explore. Just a few more words on the other settings. Bristles. Everybody knows bristles. Let's go Control D. So that's for those who like to paint and make it look like bristles. Right? We've had these for about 7 or so years, I think. Bristle brushes, can't do without. Orbicals. Those are kind of like bristles, but they are orbiting in 3D around your current what shall we call it, your mouse. So you choose a preset like this one here, and you got a sort of a torus, or this one you got 2 discs, and this basically swarms of bees. Imagine you dunk your mouse or the cursor into a pot of honey, and then you put it next to a beehive, and they start swarming around it, and as you're painting, they are just leaving their trails of pollen or whatever they're carrying on their legs, maybe some honey. And so it's doing something a little bit wacky. The wacky stuff is even wackier if you go, well, let's say take this plane here, right? So you'll see that behavior is really interesting, but then you can also have it spring loaded. So then it's kind of, it's got a little bit of a latency to that. Actually quite a lot of latency. All right, so let's say we want to make it bluish and on dark background, something like clear to black, and then do something like this, right? I might want to have a bigger image or just a smaller thingy there, but yeah, you can do some scribbly here that's yet out of this world again. All right, so finally the foliage. That's probably the only one you really cared about, right? I've been wasting your time here. So let's go and enable foliage, and now you have a little tree, right? So trees, and in fact they even seem to get darker with a little bit of post work there. You see how it takes a second after I'm done, and then it's also doing what we call self-shading or ambient occlusion, right? So it's actually rendering these in 3D, and it's calculating some lighting on the environment around it to see if any of these twigs and branches are so densely surrounded by other twigs and branches that you could not possibly really see much of them. It's too dark there. So pretty quickly you create a bouquet of flowers or trees or branches and so on. Now here there's a big difference between the foliage brushes and the particle brushes. Particles, you have one set of rules. Here are all your rules: the mass, the gravity, initial velocity, terminal velocity, lifespan, we've seen that effect, the drag amount. And please take time reading the tooltips and note any typos. But no, note any useful information is what I meant. So there's a lot of rules here. This is a rule-based system, but it's just one rule, and there's a whole set of them. But here on foliage, there's a whole set of rules. So the twigs, the branches, when they split, they don't just die off. They continue into another set of rules. So you can go from fat branches. Oops, that's not it. You can go from Control D. There, you can go from fat branches to thin branches to leaves and flowers and so on. So let's see some other presets here. Click on the load button and you'll see that there are quite a number of presets. Some branches, and let me go clear so we can see that better. Right. So we have some thick branches going into medium sized, into thin branches and twigs, and this one doesn't have much in terms of flowers and leaves, but it could. And so the reason is that there's a rules library. This one here has just one set of rules. This one has a whole library, up to 10 rules. You click on that and you can see rule number 1, rule number 2, number 3, number 4. You can go up to 10 rules. All right. Now, not all of these rules are going to be used, so sometimes you'll see them 0, 0, 0, nothing actually used. The last one here, this one, say what happens when it splits. It ends, right? But the ones before, they don't end yet. They split again, or they do other things, branch, event, and so on. There's all sorts of different things that can happen when it's time to split, or when it's time to decide what next, when a branch has reached the end of its lifespan. So what happens during the lifespan of a particular branch is controlled here. All these rules indicate how gravity affects it in one or a different direction, damping, velocity, direction, all sorts of things here. And we've spent a little bit of time here creating these so that you don't have to, right? You can just pick one and see the cactus. You can pick another one and see some classic trees here. Right, so these are some of the presets, and then there are some main options, main parameters that you do probably want to play with a little bit, especially as you're creating your assets. When you see this and say, well, that's too dark, well, then just God darn it, go here. Ambient amount, give it a bit more ambient. There you go, it's a little bit lighter. Or you don't want this shading, the dark part, turn off the shadows, right? Or actually turn this one, the shading. Right? So it's very light, but then it still calculates the ambient occlusion based surrounding self-shading. Right? So it's not shading. This one here is based on whether it's going up or down. These are going to be dark when it has parts growing downwards. Just like we had with the particles, you have this shading effect that can make grass go dark if it's going down. Right. Take a look, for instance, this one here again, the baby grass. If you draw it with the shading, that's the default. You see the ones going up are lit, and they are showing their colors. The ones going down are darkened. If you turn that off, everything is unaffected by any of that lighting. It's showing the color as is. Well, the same thing happens here with foliage, or something similar anyway. You enable your foliage. You can have it with shadows or without shadows. You can have it with shading or without shading. And so the shading here is perhaps equivalent to the shading here. That's why we call it shading in both cases. So if you disable shading, here the parts that grow down are not changing color. Now they may still get slightly darker because of this shadows here, calculation of the self-shaded shadows. If you turn that off, then it's just plain. That's sort of a pastel tree. Right, more of a flat 2D world. Whereas if you enable the shadows, the moment you let go, you see that some of them get a little bit darker because of the dense surroundings of some of them. And if you keep drawing a few of them, the inner parts will start getting pretty dark and give you that sense of 3D depth to it. Right. So there is the shading. You can enable the brightness. You can give it some tinting. Right, you can tint it by kind of a reddish and it may have a little bit of an effect on the appearance of that, right? If you give it more of a greenish, there you see it's more of a greenish tint. But it still also further changes it by some other parameters. There's the ambient. If you have too much of that, you have fog. There you go. This one is a bit more saturated now, a bit more the greenish look. And then if you say, let's give it a blue tree, you get a bluish look. Give it a pink tree, get a pinkish or purplish. All of these fillings will combine based on a number of parameters. And you can also give it a maximum here, an overriding maximum of the particle count. So if you find that that bush is too dense or there are too many twigs and so on, maybe you can make it very, very, very thin and have very few of these. So 444, a little bit more. Let's see, let's not do the tinting so much, or the ambient, but you can see that there is a lot of parameters here that you can play with. The diffuse light, this also can affect it a lot in its appearance, in its brightness. The pen size, make it a little bit smaller, it's going to be very thin twigs. Look at that, very thin branches. All right, so just one preset to start from, and then do a lot of different things with it. Right, this one here, for instance, that's one of the evergreens. Well, maybe it's a little bit too fat or too thick, right? Well, so then use thinner branches. What do we have currently for the pen size? 4. If you go up to 7, it's even more so, even more overwhelming, right? Very dense here. Let's go and disable the shading. That's better, but it's still dark because there is so much of it. The self-shading that we have is going to give it a very dark appearance there. That's actually what we want. But sometimes you do need more of a very thin look on these branches, so keep working with the pen size. Make it 2, and now you have very thin ones, like young trees. There you go. Alright. So that's basically how you work with some of this, and you can also use these to create assets with the alpha channel. So again, create alpha. We'll do that right here. Now there is a little difference between this one and the one we had in particles. In particles they are cumulative. You can draw one and then another one, and it keeps growing on top of the existing alpha. This one doesn't do that. So if you have an alpha already, then that one is being used and the new one is rendered, but the old one is not there. But there's a trick around that. There's a workaround for that. All right, so let me show you that, and then I'll be done for this tutorial. So what we'll do is we'll say, let's draw a first one with perhaps a little bit more on the thickness here. Pen size, let's give it about 3 or 4 there. 3, and we have this one, and we're happy with that. Let's go store it. Let's store at least the alpha. I would say actually store the whole image. Store image, and the alpha is stored with that, but let's store the alpha, the selection as well. Let's store alpha. So you have here a copy of just the selection mask. Right? Now we're going to clear this, and I mean just the alpha, clear the alpha, and draw another one on top, right? And that's this one. We could store that one too. Where's store alpha? So we have 2 of those. But this one is really not necessarily needed. What we really need is to bring the original alpha channel back, because the image from the original painting is still there. The alpha isn't. But we had stored it, so we can add it. We can add this one. Now we have the combination of both. That's the one we want to grab back. In fact, simply grab it here, get alpha. Now we have it stored right there. Or you could have gone to selection and store a separate one if you want to start accumulating different versions in different stored images. The key thing I want to mention really is that you can actually easily do that. You can draw another one here, maybe here on the left side. Boom, boom, boom. Now you have a new alpha for just this new tree. Just add this one to it. Now you have everything combined again. And then just grab it, get alpha, and you have it safely tucked away here. Let's do a 4th one here on the right side. All right, all the way to the top. Boom. Let's go add this stored one and grab it all. Get alpha. Now you have this entire thing, and you can go easily, let's say show it at 100%. You can go and easily do. Actually, I forgot something. I had to clear the alpha first. Right? See how we have all these appearing in white because I forgot. In 2 times I did it right, but 2 times I did it wrong. I did not clear the alpha, and therefore it drew the new alpha, but it didn't use the new the clear alpha. It used the existing alpha before, and so it didn't end up drawing onto that for the RGB channels. So the right way to do it. Let's do a drum roll on that. is to start with something like this, and you might want to start with dark colors, but you can do the correction later on, right? The pre-multiply correction. We should be able to do that as well. So let's do this. Let's go and draw a first one like this. All right, and then let's go and store that. Selection, store alpha. All right, now let's go clear the alpha. That's a quick Control D. If you don't have the keyboard focus anymore because it's on this little floating window here, simply go here, clear alpha. All right, now draw another one, this one here. Now go add the alpha. Now go get the alpha. Now you have both alphas stored away and both images here in the image buffer. Now you can go clear the alpha again and draw a third one. Bum, bum, bum. Add the alpha, get the alpha. Now you have a stored copy here. Get the keyboard focus by clicking on the title bar, Control D. Oh, didn't take it. All right, never mind. Let's go to clear alpha. There you go. Do a fourth one. Draw this. Add the alpha. Get the alpha stored away. Okay, so now this is the image you want to perhaps use as an asset. Right, you got the 4 trees, you got the 4 alpha channels all added together, and it actually has it right in there. So you could go and say, let's go to the bush, to the brush, and say store and no, there, use selected as brush. Right. So now you have, if you disable the particle, the brush, there you have it. You have the whole thing, and you can paint this. You can see it has this glow effect. So we will need to go to, first of all, store it. That's a safe copy to have here. And then we can go brush and pre-multiply correction. Yep, white background. Let's fix it. So now we have a very nice set of trees with transparent background. This is a clean asset to use. All right. And that will complete this tutorial. Thanks for watching. Thanks for howling and waffling, and have fun.